Welcome live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning into the week ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. Let's take a look at some of those headlines. Eskom suspends rolling blackouts due to an improvement in generation capacity. The economy is set to come under even heavier cost pressures when fuel prices increase on the 1st of June. South Africa records 4,074 new cases of COVID-19 in the latest reporting cycle. Well, those were a look at some of your headlines. Let's get into other stories making headlines this week. The ANC has concluded its presentation and discussion around its economic transformation documents. It says it has a more focused emphasis on the digital economy and improving the fortunes of SMEs in the country. The party says its priority is to ensure energy security, as it states that the lack of electricity supply is hampering economic development and job creation. Well, Nompumelelo Siziba has more on that.
The issue of a capable state is one that the ANC always talks about, that they want to ensure that they have a capable state. And given the history that we have, around state capture, and not even state capture, just the basic delivery of basic services, like water, sanitation, filling in potholes and things like that, the daily lived experience, particularly by poorer members of the community, is not a great one at all. So that was a question that we put to them, to say that you have all these great plans about delivering this and delivering that, but can you really assure people that you'll be able to do that? They say that they've taken lessons from the past, and that going forward they are going to be ensuring that people who are in positions where they have to deliver services will be better able to do so. Of course, only time will be able to tell. They emphasized a lot on vocational courses and vocational learning. We know that TVET colleges at the beginning of the ANC dispensation were actually shut down, many of them, and then there was the realization that, we actually need to train more youngsters and so on and so forth. They're saying that they're re-emphasizing that, saying that TVET colleges need to work better to ensure that we can generate plumbers and other types of artisans that are needed in the economy, because that has sort of been ignored, and that there needs to be a mindset amongst younger people, not to feel that going to a TVET college is lesser than going to university. And besides, people have different abilities, and some people work better with their hands, some people are more cerebral, So they were saying that people need to get their heads around what they're able to do and go to the right institutions of learning so that they can play their part in the economy. As you mentioned in the introduction, the whole issue of SMEs, they say that they recognize that they've really taken their eye off the ball around the development of SMEs. Currently, the ANC government has launched this fund of some 15 billion rand to help SMEs, following the COVID disaster and also the floods and so on and so forth. But in the scheme of things, it probably isn't enough. So they're saying that going forward, they want to ensure that there are more initiatives to be able to help the SME sector, because globally speaking, there's an understanding and an appreciation that it's the SME, the entrepreneur, who's actually going to get the economy going, and to a lesser extent, your multinationals. They don't employ as many people as, say, SMEs would when you take them into their totality. The digital economy is something they're paying more attention to as well. It's their aim and their hope that very soon, especially with the recent release of Spectrum, that South Africans are going to be able to broadly have access to the internet and be able to learn and work digitally and just become more included, not only in our local economy but our global economy, because of course once you have access to the internet, you become a global citizen and you can can even earn money by working for somebody else internationally just by having an internet connection. So they were talking about a lot of these things. Of course, this is the policy documents are living documents. They're going to be consulting with stakeholders, the general public. Today, they wanted to hear from the media and get questions from the media to begin a conversation. But they're going to be speaking to members of the public, experts in the various sectors and fields of the policy areas that they're covering. So that engagement is going to continue, and then things will then be processed. They use the word process at the policy conference, which is set to take place at the end of July. That's sort of 5 months ahead of the elective conference, which takes place between the 16th and the 20th of December, where that policy will be consolidated and firmed up for the future. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what came out of this briefing.
Well, in other news, the hotly contested ANC Ekurhuleni Regional Conference resumes in Fourways, Johannesburg. The business of the conference was delayed due to disagreements over several disqualified branches. Delegates only adopted the much contentious credentials this morning. SABC News reporter Kani Mapanga is there.
Good day to you, Lisa, and the viewers at home. I'm still coming to you live from the Ndaba Hotel and Conference Center, where we will be seeing the final day of the Ekurhuleni Regional Conference, where Mzwandile Masina and Dr. Kagaza are vying for the top position. Now, Lisa, when we did leave you yesterday, in our last update at 9, the delegates did go back in to adopt credentials. However, we understand that this process took the entire night, and they only completed this process at around 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. in the morning. The delegates then took a break and planned to come back to conference for the conference to reconvene at 11. However, as you can see at this current hour, we're still waiting for the program to begin shortly. We understand that the delay in the credentials process was due to this issue of the outstanding disputes of the 7 branches. As we understand it now, 2 of these branches have been qualified. The 5 remaining branches will be allowed to participate. However, these processes or these votes will be quarantined. We'll continue to monitor the situation. As you may know, the conference was expected to start on Friday and conclude today. However, it only began on Saturday at around 4 p.m. So there may be some changes to the agenda, and we don't have clarity as to where they'll be going next, but I'll continue to monitor you as the conference unfolds today, as they expect it to conclude with all their processes. Over to you in studio.
All right, thank you very much, Kani Mapanga. Again, just an update on what's transpiring, Kani Mapanga, at the ANC Ekurhuleni Regional Conference happening at the Ndaba Hotel and Conference Center in Fourways. All other news making headlines this week. South Africa has a major issue of youth unemployment that requires a multi-pronged approach to raise employment and drive inclusion, as well as promote social cohesion. High youth unemployment means youth are not acquiring the skills or experience needed to drive the economy forward and compete competitively globally. With the increasing number of unemployed university graduates as well, youth unemployment calls for urgent attention. As we enter the month of June, when Youth Month is observed, we are joined by Neo Musala. She's the head of economic policy and research at the South African Youth Economic Council for more. Neo, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC.
Afternoon, Liesl. Thank you for having me.
Look, the issue of youth unemployment, perhaps its effects from here into, is obviously coming to the fore during Youth Month. That's going to be observed on the 1st of June, on Wednesday. I think before we get into some of that, let's look at your work to date as SAYEC. I mean, recently you held a Youth Jobs Imbizo, which focused on assessing government and private sector policies across key strategic sectors in our economy, which is obviously necessary for mass youth unemployment in South Africa. I wonder if you could tell us what emerged upon engaging with the various stakeholders in energy, finance, tech, arts, and SMEs.
Well, this was our first Jobs Imbizo, but I think the outcomes of the Job Imbizo were very promising, especially concerning stakeholders who came into the Imbizo asking what they can do. In the tech sector, we've established with some of our sponsors that we're going to try and establish tech hubs, because one of the things that came out of our sessions consulting with young people in the Imbizo was around tech and how they feel excluded from the tech sector despite interest. So there are developments like that. It's us also engaging with DFIs, because we realize that especially around young people who have started businesses and are these entrepreneurs that were always being told about and being encouraged to participate in, funding is a major issue, and developmental funding in particular needs to be strategic in South Africa. So we've had engagements with SIDA and CIFA, who are government institutions which are geared specifically around the issue of supporting SMMEs. And we were in the Western Cape, so we engaged with the SIDA and the CIFA of the Western Cape, and the results were promising, because as a result of our convening with the Councillor of Langa and the SIDA and CIFA organizations, we came out with a plan about how to help young entrepreneurs who are in townships that are very disadvantaged but have these businesses that they want to start. So it's those type of engagements at the grassroots level, but also at a higher policy level, that we're aiming to do. And we really, especially in this Youth Month, would like more stakeholders to come on board, and not just come, for a talk shop, but to have things that they are willing to give to young people, whether it be in terms of jobs, skills development, and also businesses and support for our businesses, which are largely informal businesses. And then if they're formalized, they are largely SMMEs. So those are our focal points and some of the progress that we've made out of the Imbizo.
All right, thank you very much. I think it's so appropriate to start with some of the solutions that have also come up, because we seem to be having the same conversation year in, year out. And so what, we can do to perhaps take it forward and help those is certainly necessary. I think context is also important. So closely associated with skills development is the issue of unemployment. Again, South Africa's unemployment rate associated with a range of social problems such as poverty, inequality, and also crime. And I wonder if you could walk us through some of these factors, given the alarming unemployment stats amongst youth in particular in South Africa.
I think the problem of youth unemployment, the consensus that we can all have, is that it's one of economic exclusion. This is a systemic problem. The type of unemployment that we have in South Africa isn't just cyclical unemployment, where because of COVID or because of certain things that are happening in the economy, people lose jobs and then after a while they get those jobs back. I mean, when you have, by the expanded definition of youth unemployment, we have a stat, I think it's 74% of young people in South Africa being unemployed. That's a systemic exclusion of this large group of people from the economy. These are people who, in terms of human resources and intellectual resources, are really the people that are going to drive this country forward, and they're being excluded from being participants in the economy. So that's the sort of structure and the extent of the problem that we're dealing with. And I think in terms of the private sector and their role in this, we have to address how our economy is largely monopolistic, and it allows larger companies to be able to thrive in the economy. Even with high unemployment, and even in a COVID crisis, you have larger companies being able to survive, but at the end of the day, they aren't creating those jobs. And the places where a large number of jobs in developing countries would be coming from, like the developing sector, like small and medium enterprises, aren't able to survive these shocks, and they can't survive the economic structure in general. The fact that it is so hard for small businesses to even enter markets, to be able to integrate into supply chains. And these are the issues that kept coming up. They come up in different ways, in different examples, in different sectors, whether it be in the finance sector, whether it be in tech, whether it be in energy and mining. It comes up constantly, whether it be in the service industry and services sector, that young people feel like they don't just feel that way, it's actually the reality. We are this sort of economically excluded group. So that's the magnitude of the problem. And all our solutions need to be strategic and engaging with the essence and the foundation of the problem.
Well, speaking of, those factors, let me add on to some of the other issues that's obviously also become a reality for a lot of the youth in South Africa. The issue of skill set and future labor force, equipping them for the markets to compete globally is also key. I wonder how you could contextualize, South Africa's doing into how we're faring. What are the biggest gaps? I'm asking you this because socioeconomic inequality and inadequate education are also some of the factors that drive high unemployment rates. It also disproportionately affects Black youth's access to quality education. And so in lieu of this, what are some of those socioeconomic and political problems relating to youth at this point? Because it's not just, access to markets. It's the issue of gender, sex. It's the issue of quality education, amongst others. How is this all compounding the issue?
I think coming or following the Fees Must Fall movement, there's been a lot of engagement on the higher education sector. And I think TVET colleges at the moment are getting the attention that they should have been getting from the start as institutions which are very accessible to people from socioeconomic circumstances that don't allow them to enter universities, right? And TVET colleges are spread across the country. They're more accessible. Therefore, they need to be quality institutions. When the markets talk about how we don't have the skills that they want, TVET colleges need to be the ones that zone in on what the trends in industries are. When industries are saying we're moving forward and we feel that the South African workforce isn't moving forward with us, we need TVET colleges to be the ones that are able to skill young people. Things like CETAs need to be strategically employed in skilling people. They need to be credible training qualifications that you can get through a CETA, where once you've completed that program, it's not just up to the government to give you a job. You can actually go out there and have a credible qualification as a person who can, become an artisan, become someone who is an electrician, or other sort of jobs that we see are kind of neglected in our modern economy, but are the jobs that most of the time ordinary people are able to do, are able to be able to skill themselves quickly and get to working without having to deal with issues of accumulating student debt, of moving to a completely different area in order to get education. So that's a very big issue. And then the other thing would be the people that get lost through the schooling system. Many people don't even make it to matric. They're not able to go to the TVET colleges. So there's a deep systemic problem with literacy and numeracy in our South African schools. And without addressing that quality of learning that most people in South Africa who now do have access to education, the majority of children in South Africa do go to school, they enter the schooling system. How do we retain them in that system and also not just treat it as a creche for children, from grade 1 to grade 12, you're being babysat. It's about making sure that whether you leave in grade 10 or you leave in matric, there's a skill, there's something that you can take to an employer and say, hi, I'm able to do this. And then the employer, on the other hand, needs to be willing to take someone who doesn't have experience. The issue of experience is a very big one. And these demands for 3 years of experience in very practical fields, but companies not being willing to invest in skilling people. If you are all asking for all of this experience, but none of you are willing to give matriculants and graduates the opportunity to learn from you, who is meant to do that? The system is just not sustainable.
Yeah, access, equality, equity, all forms of justice that we're seeking. Perhaps in conclusion, let's, look at the number of initiatives as we head into June, Youth Month, calls to action as we aim to bridge this skill set and unemployment gaps. What solutions on the table, particularly with a focus on Youth Month in June? And as a youth, we're obviously looking at the issue of social security at large, empowering our future labor force. What's your biggest fears, your biggest challenges, but also what gives you hope now?
I think starting with the hopeful aspects, what gives me hope is that there does seem to be genuine concern arising from the private sector and from the government about the crisis. And we appreciate the concern. But in Youth Month, we need it to be all hands on deck. We need commitments. We need solid investments into projects with our organization and various other organizations that have been doing the work. And these commitments need to be strategically driven towards addressing the problems that young people are talking talking about. Things like having a skills symposium, for example, just being able to get young people exposed to the idea that there is a sector, that if you're a young person and you're mathematically adept, there's something that you can do, and there are institutions that are willing to finance you, whether it's higher education for you to go to university or for you to be able to start your own business. We need those tangible outcomes in Youth Month. This Youth Month can't go by being another talk shop and everyone talking about how bad the situation is. We need government and the private sector to put their money where their mouth is. And the fortunate thing is these institutions exist. DFIs exist. The CEDA and the CIFA type of organizations exist, but they aren't adequate and they're not efficient at the moment, and they're not adequately funded. And that's where we start to pressure government and the private sector to say, you need to invest resources into solving the problem. We can't all just be staring at each other in the eyes and saying this is a crisis. What's happening is not sustainable, and it is a crisis, and we need all actors to come on board, from civil society, which has really been doing the work, but also for government and the private sector to meet us halfway.
Well, now let's leave the conversation there. I trust we're going to be having more of this, but perhaps also looking at ways to put talk into action this month, particularly in June. I want to thank you very much for your time today. Neo Musala, Head of Economic Policy and Research at the South African Youth Economic Council. Again, chatting about the challenges faced by the youth. This as we enter the month of June to observe Youth Month. Again, thank you very much for your time today. Let's take a quick ad break and continue with more news and updates on the other side. This is the week ahead. Welcome back. The week ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson, continues. In other news now, the economy is set to come under even heavier cost pressures when fuel prices increase on the 1st of June. The Department of Minerals and Energy is expected to make the fuel price adjustment announcement in the coming week, where estimates based on the Central Energy Fund's daily data suggest significant increases for petrol and, to a lesser degree, diesel and paraffin. It's not just consumers who will come under pressure, but businesses as well.
Global oil prices remain elevated, currently trading around $115 a barrel. And the local currency has been susceptible to bouts of weakness due to a firmer dollar. These factors are translating into higher fuel prices at the pump overseas and here at home.
When it comes to petrol, the data today is showing an increase of around R2.40 for petrol, around R1.10 for diesel, and around R1.55 for illuminating paraffin. So the picture is negative, and of course we have this looming return of the R1.50 to the general fuel levy. So all in all, the picture is not looking positive for consumers in South Africa come the 1st of June.
The impending fuel increases are going to severely dampen industry and the wider economy. For players in the road logistics arena, they say truck operating firms will have no choice but to pass on the cost.
That price increase or cost increase into operating a transport service will go to the customer. There's no other answer to that.
Every part of the economy, consumers and businesses alike, will be hard hit by the fuel increases.
The impact is going to be quite severe, and it's going to have a ripple effect further down the economy on a macro level in terms of inflation.
And there are concerns that the elevated price of fuel is not going to go away anytime soon. There's a feeling that the government really needs to start thinking out of the box to work towards a sustainable economy. In the short term, however, higher fuel prices will add to the slew of other higher expenses South Africans are having to deal with, pushing up inflation, which is likely to see continued interest rate hikes from the Reserve Bank as it works to tame the trend of escalating prices. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, farmers will have to dig deep into their pockets as fuel prices continue to rise. They say they might eventually not have a choice but to stop farming as it becomes uneconomical for them to continue. Itumeleng Khajane and video journalist Silo Mokgopa have more on that story.
Meet the 27-year-old crop farmer, Edric Badenhorst. He owns a 2,000-hectare farm planting maize, sunflower, cotton and wheat. He uses about 200,000 liters of diesel annually on his farm and the persistent fuel hikes have become a nightmare for him.
Diesel prices went up from this time last year to this time this year. It went up by 65%. So that's quite a big increase, and it's going to, at the long run, it's going to have a big influence on food prices.
His challenges are compounded by other input costs.
The fertilizer prices also increased by 160% from this time last year to now, and then another big increase is our seed prices. That went up around 30% as well. So all that is creating a big factor in the inset costs for us to produce maize or any food. And
he says the only way to counter this is if farmers are paid more for their produce.
The only thing I see that can make the problem better is when the price the farmer gets is also going to increase. So like the price we get per ton if we sell our products, if that price increases, it's going to balance the sheet evenly.
Farmers say urgent intervention is needed to address this challenge before it affects them more than it already has. Itumeleng Khajani, SABC News, Geisdorp, Northwest.
Meanwhile, striking Sibanye-Stillwater mine workers have called on President Cyril Ramaphosa to urgently intervene in their dispute with management after rejecting yet another wage offer. Workers refused to budge from their wage demand of 1,000 rand and a 6% increase.
No end in sight for the 3-month strike at Sibanye-Stillwater. Unions have been locked in negotiations following the Labour Minister's intervention. Workers have been offered a 700 rand wage increase and an additional 3,000 rand, which has been rejected. According to the unions, the offer on the table is 700 rand for the first year, 1,000 rand in the second, and 900 rand in the third.
The workers are saying 1,000 rand or nothing. So we want to emphasize that, and we are just mandate carriers. We take mandate from our members and negotiate and bring the feedback to them. So the question of 700 rand, 800 rand has been rejected long ago. So we want to see where can we settle this strike.
The unions have raised concern around the living conditions of mine workers. Despite being employed, some still cannot afford to buy decent housing, saying the current wage offer is not enough to buy 2 loaves of bread every day for a month.
The inflation rate as we speak is standing at 5.9, right? If it's 5.9, what is Sibanye giving? It's far lower, by a 0.9% basis. And Sibanye wants the officials and the rig drills and winch operators to take 5%, which is far below than the cost of living.
Talks are expected to continue next week. Workers say they are determined to stay until the impasse is resolved. Balentle Mthethwa, SABC News, Pretoria.
Right, in other news making headlines this week. This year, National Child Protection Week will be held under the theme, Let Us All Protect Children during COVID-19 and beyond. The aim is to raise awareness of the rights of children as articulated in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and the Children's Act, Act number 38 of 2005. Joining us, perhaps to discuss the challenges facing children, we're joined by Dr. Shahida Omar. She's the Director of Clinical Services at the Teddy Bear Clinic for Abused Children. Dr. Shahida, good afternoon. Thank you very much for making time to join us here on the SABC.
Thank you.
Let's just look at some of the issues at hand. It seems that there's a rise in the abuse of children across the country, and yet there are programs in place to raise awareness. So, in your opinion, what more should be done at this point?
So I just want to, from the outset, say that, yes, it's Child Protection Week, but we need to understand and appreciate that child protection all the time. It's a 365-day campaign. Every second, every minute, every hour, we need to be aware of ensuring the safety and protection of all children Your child is my child, and the spirit of Ubuntu, where we need to say child protection is not your business, not my business, it's our business. So what do we need to do? We have a lot of awareness programs, which you've alluded to, a lot of awareness raising on different levels, on micro, meso, and macro level, with children at ECD facilities, at your primary school, senior primary, high school, and even in tertiary institutions. However, there's something going wrong, because as you've articulated, that we are seeing children being brutalized, children being violated, children being murdered, children being poisoned, children being gang raped, and these are all children, these are minors who are vulnerable, who are helpless, powerless, defenseless, who cannot stand up and speak out and stop the violation or the scourge of violation against them. So I think what we are missing, it's great to have this Child Protection Week, but we need to ensure that there's consistency in this messaging, but the messaging should also be made available and accessible to people in disadvantaged communities, the rural areas. Many of us have access to social media, to national TV, to national radio, and people in the rural areas don't always have access to this kind of information. So awareness raising is key, but we need to ensure that they also have right to information, but right to access to resources and support systems. Because if we look at the rural areas, of course, the resources are few and far between. And we know that many of the impoverished communities do not even have money to pay for transport costs to arrive at a hospital, to actually report to a family violence, child protection, and sexual offences unit. So these are things, these are challenges. And what we need to also be aware, you mentioned the constitutional rights, the rights to education, the right to food. And we are finding that another challenge, 1 in 5 children are malnourished. They're suffering stunting, which impacts on their social and cognitive development, which has a ripple effect in terms of their development, their trajectory, in terms of their future life. You know, it's actually quite bleak and dismal. So I want to also, elaborate that it's not because of COVID-19 that children are suffering from these things, lack of education or opportunities. We know that this has been a long-standing problem. However, we need to look at how we're going to work together. All the government departments need to come to the party. It's not just the responsibility of social development or education or home affairs, but everybody needs to work together, and we need to strategize that to ensure that resources are allocated with adequate budgets where children have access to all the supports, but not only the children, they do not exist in isolation. It's also their caretakers, the caregivers, the significant others. Children are not born with an instruction manual. Parents are not aware on how to manage, how to respond, or how to protect their children. But another challenge that we continue to face is, whose responsibility is it to protect children? Yeah. Children at home are being violated. Children going to school are being violated at school. Children traveling in transport facilities are being violated there. So it's usually people that have a relationship with children or know or have access to children. And the reality is that we cannot exclude the stranger danger situation as well. So again, I think we are definitely missing something where we need to look at how best to protect children.
Yeah, you've spoken about, also looking up at the systemic issues that were only exacerbated perhaps by this COVID-19 pandemic. And the theme this year is about protecting the children as we are faced with the COVID-19 pandemic. You've spoken about a myriad of challenges that children continue to face. And another issue that's also come to the fore was the high teenage pregnancy rate that also emerged, particularly during this pandemic. I wonder if you could speak to that, compounded by the psychosocial trauma that was inherited, perhaps from our past as a nation, how this is all compounding the issue.
So thank you for highlighting the challenges that our teenagers face. And I think we need to just appreciate, it's easy to blame, to attach labels, stigmatize the teenager who is pregnant. Being exposed, working with, engaging with these young children, because they are children, what actually emerged is a lot of them did not have adequate information. They were fearful of reaching out to platforms, healthcare facilities, because of the fear of reprisal, fear of being rebuked, chastised, and the responses that were elicited by healthcare practitioners. So this prevented them from seeking the necessary information, guidance, counseling, information on contraception. And having sessions with some of the children, what surfaced was that a lot of the information around sex and sexuality, they gained that information not from their parents or primary caregivers, which they indicated is where they would have liked to hear the information so that they could receive accurate and correct information. And I think this is some of the challenges that our children face, because sex and sexuality continues to remain a taboo subject. And because of the responses that professionals, healthcare practitioners are not always equipped, they're not therapists, they're not psychologists, they're not social workers, and they do not always have the ability to communicate with children. I think we are falling short there. We need to ensure that children are given the opportunity, they are empowered, they are enlightened, and they should be given a platform not to be afraid to seek out any information and any concerns they have. So what we are finding is that a lot of these young mothers or mothers-to-be are finding themselves in a situation where they're feeling helpless, they feel ashamed, they feel humiliated, embarrassed, and they feel that they've let their families down, they're very despondent. We are also seeing a growing incidence of depressed teenagers who have been impregnated, and sometimes some of them have been raped and are afraid to come forward and make a disclosure simply because of the kind of response that will be elicited. They're afraid of police as well, law enforcement, they're afraid of their families. It's just fear, anxiety, worry for young children who have already felt that they've failed society, failed themselves, the inadequacies, the insecurities that they face with, and then of course looking ahead in terms of their future, their trajectory, they see no hope, they are despondent, and it's just a state of despair. And I think this is something that we also need to realize, that during COVID-19, during the lockdown period, when schools were closed, recreational facilities were not available or accessible, no social engagement. These are all challenges that really, there were more risk factors than protective factors available to our children.
Dr. Sheda, just in conclusion, when you look at the work of your organization and perhaps others in the same space, looking back on the work that has been done, the strides that, the country has undertaken in ensuring that education around the rights of children is kept alive. I mean, how would you fare that? In the same breath, what are some of the initiatives that you've planned that you are looking forward to engaging in during this month, this week in particular?
Thank you for that. So what we are engaging with is, of course, we continue to do this, but during this week particularly, it's engaging with our children, engaging with the parents, engaging with communities. So we speak to them about safe programs, acceptable and unacceptable touches, their rights and responsibilities, and knowing that it's okay to say no, because sometimes they feel so compromised, they feel because of seeking approval and affection will go along to get along, realizing that they're finding themselves in very risky situations and circumstances which could have long-term implications. So engaging with children of all ages, engaging with educators, engaging in public spaces like your taxi ranks, faith-based organizations where we're engaging with the general congregation. So it's not just impacting on children, because children are nested in layers, they're part of systems. And of course, we have already had sessions with teen moms, and we continue to have sessions. But I think we also need to understand that we are looking at children, both male and female child, that we cannot exclude the boy child. So we have to engage men and boys. That is critical and vital if we want to disrupt the cycle of violence against children.
Absolutely. Dr. Shahida Omar, we're going to leave the conversation there. I want to thank you very much for your time. It's often difficult conversations, but necessary, perhaps, as we look at where to from here. Again, Dr. Shahida Omar, Director of the Clinical Services at the Teddy Bear Clinic for Abused Children, chatting about the initiatives that are going to get underway. This as obviously we observe Child Protection Week this coming week. It's under the theme, Let Us All Protect Children During COVID-19 and beyond. Well, let's take a look at some other stories now as the Kingdom of Lesotho gears up for the 2022 National Assembly elections. Many political parties have kick-started the campaign trail in earnest. One of the newly formed parties, Reforms for Prosperity, the RFP, is making waves in Lesotho's political sphere. They're launching their first ever manifesto today. Let's take you live there.
Dipula di hohotse ditsela le marogo. Batho ba tsamaya dibaka tse telele ho ya fihla ditshebeletsong tsa bohlokwa tseo ba di hlokang. Bana ba iphumana ba hlolwa ho ya dikolong ha noka di tletse. Le baholo ba rona ba hlolwa ho finyella ditsing tsa thapelo. Ditsela di senyehile. Dikoloi ha di sa finyella dibakeng tse ding. Dibakeng tse ding ha ho hlile ha o ditsela ho hang. Banna ba ntse ba jaga ditopo. Isita le ba khatshane ka mampara. Dikolong tse ding bana ba ntse ba kenela ka ntle. Dilemong tsena. Mme le thepa ya ho ruta ke e maemong a tlase haholo. Le tsona dititjhere tsa rona di sebetsa tlasa maemo a sa dumelleheng ho hang. Ka tsela e tshwanang, baoki ba bang ba sebeletsa ditsing tsa maemo a hlobaetsang haholo. Dibakeng tse ding metsi e ntse e le bothata. Ho tse ding lona marangrang e sa le mathata. Puisano e sa le boima. Ka lehlakoreng le leng re ntse re bona hore le ona masole mapolesa ha mmoho le mautlwela a rona ha bana disebediswa tse ba dumellang hore ba etse mesebetsi ya bona ka tsela e khotsofatsang. Taba ena ya disebediswa e boetse e qalelletse ho ama bahlanka ba mmuso ka kotloloho. Bembaka mona ha ke bue mehlolo, ke bua dintho tseo le di tsebang ka ha le phela ka hara naheng. Ke re dintho tsena re a di tseba. Jwalo ka ha le tseba dibakeng tse ding re sebile ra nna ra kenya letsoho e le rona ho thusa setjhaba. Rempa re setjhaba sa habo rona re hloka menwana ya lona. Ha ho ka moo re ka kenang pusong ha e se ka menwana ya lona. Re le kopa hore le re dumelle hore re be mmuso. E le hore re tlo phethahatsa maano ana a rona. Re ken re bone ntho e ntjha. Ka mahlo ha ke sheba ke bona eka RFP e na le botshehetsi bo hlollang ka hare le ka ntle ho naha ya Lesotho. Ke se ke sa tshohe hore na ebe re a amoheleha na. Ntho e sa nthobatseng ke hore na ebe matshweletshwele a batshehetsi na ebe a tla fela finyelle ditsing tsa ho ya kgetha. Ke ka hona nkekeng ka phetsa ho ipiletsa ho lona hlebeng baka. Ka la pele kgweding ena e tlang IEC e tla bulela dingodiso. Ke a le kopa baesong go ya ngodisa le IEC go tloa ka di-1 tsa kgwedi e tlang go tla bo butswe. Ho letlele mpe le ipontshe moo e le hore motho o be le karete ya hao e sa le hona jwale. Lerato la hao ho RFP le tla bonahala ha o tshwere karete ya hao ya ho kgetha. Baheso merero ya rona e phuthetswe ke mohuo ona wa rona e mengata. Tokomane e teng le tla e fuwa bohle pele le tloa mona. Ke thetha puo ya ka ho boetse ke le leboha beng ba ka boteng ba lona ho tla atlehisa seboka sena sa ho thakgola mohuo wa lona. Baheso ke a kgola re a tseba hore naha ena ya rona ya Lesotho ile ya fumana boipuso ka nako e tshwanang ka selemo se le seng le Swatseng le Botswana. Hona jwale ha o thola o sheba hore na dinaha tseno tse pedi di hokae le rona, ka nnete ke mahlabisa dihlong. Hobane naha ya Swatseng ha jwale ka moruo e re menahanya hararo. Naha ya Botswana e re menahanyana ka makgetlo a tsheletseng. Ke a kgola baheso, ke a kgola ba bangata ha ba kebe ba dumele ha ke re le nna jwalo ka lona ke nentse ke le motshikudi. Le ka dumela go nkile ka rekisa diapole?
All right, so these are live visuals coming through from Lesotho. Sam Matikane addressing crowds who have come out to listen to the party, speaking about challenges of electricity, roads, education, health. He says that his party wants to correct this. You know, there's also been concerns about security cluster needing, attention. So Sam Matikane is out there urging voters to vote for them so they can perhaps implement this change and enforce the manifesto. Again, also just urging members to go and check with IEC officials to make sure that they are registered and all is in order. Again, the Kingdom of Lesotho gearing up for the 2022 National Assembly elections. Many political parties will have kick-started their campaign trail in earnest, and one of the newly formed parties, the Revolution for Prosperity, making waves in Lesotho, just coming out to address some of the crowds and put forth their manifesto. Again, hearing from Sam Matikane. Let's take a quick ad break and continue with more news on the continent on the other side. You're watching The Week Ahead. Welcome back. Let's take a look at more news now. Kenya's official campaign period begins today ahead of general elections in August this year. The country has, however, been in a campaign mood for the better part of President Uhuru Kenyatta's second term in office following Uhuru's fallout with his deputy, Dr. William Ruto. And our first story in a series of stories in Kenya decides, Sarah Kimani takes a look at the high-stakes polls.
After the constitutional 2 terms in power, it is time for Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta to retire. Unlike his predecessor, the late Mwai Kibaki, who exited the scene quietly, Kenyatta has dived deep into the murky waters of succession politics.
Tumeamua ya kwamba huyo we have decided in one resolve that the person is none other than Raila Amolo Odinga.
Choosing his one-time political enemy, Raila Odinga, over his deputy, Dr. William Ruto. There are just over 40 presidential aspirants in the race to succeed Kenyatta, but the battle is between front-runners Ruto and Odinga. So who are these two men?
Raila Odinga is somebody who has spent his entire life trying to make Kenya democratic. He has promised to change Kenya all his life, but he never gotten an opportunity. Now, William Ruto is a very hard-working Kenyan. He's an extremely brilliant Kenyan.
The general elections comes on the back of an economy on its knees due to the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict, and huge debts incurred by the current administration. So Kenyans will be looking for candidates who can quickly turn around the economy and ease their burden.
We have actually two primary issues that should concern us in this election. Number one is corruption. Corruption is run away now in this country, especially under Jubilee. It simply became normal. The other, of course, is the economy. And the economy becomes important because we have unreasonable taxation.
Opinion polls have put Odinga and Ruto neck to neck, almost evenly matched in the hotly contested race. The choice of running mate seems to have excited the electorate after Odinga went for former Justice and Constitutional Affairs Minister Martha Karua, who is known to be a no-nonsense democracy and human rights crusader. Ruto went for Rigathi Gachagua, a member of parliament seen to have deep pockets and a sharp tongue.
The perception is important in an election. Our perception is that the country is rich, the people work hard, but their leaders rob them. So they need a guarantee from the future government that that government will not rob them. Now, Martha Karua gives that guarantee because he is a crusader against corruption all her life.
A post-election peace pact between Kenyatta and Odinga in 2018 has led to the formation of Odinga's coalition under the banner of Azimio la Umoja, Quest for Unity. It has a 10-point development action plan that promises to end poverty, make healthcare and education universal and affordable, among others.
A pledge to lead an all-out war on poverty, unemployment and hopelessness in Kenya, and actualized Article 43 of our Constitution, which guarantees Kenyans the rights to education, health, food, water, housing, and social security.
Deputy President William Ruto's coalition, known as Kenya Kwanza, Kenya First, has zeroed in on the millions of jobless youth in the country, the hustler, as he calls them, and promised to bring them on board in his government.
We are changing our economic model from trickle down to bottom up so that we can lift everybody from the bottom and have a Kenya that is equal.
And I can tell you, his hustler narrative has captured the imagination of Kenyans. It has really captured the imagination because for all the elections we have been having since independence, economy has never been an issue for an election. He has made it an issue. Single-handedly, Ruto has made that an issue. Ruto, single-handedly, he has dissolved the tribe. In this election, the tribe is not an issue because he brought the hustler narrative to bear.
The bitter divisions between Kenyatta and Ruto continue to play out in the ongoing campaigns as Kenyatta defends his administration against claims that it has performed dismally.
The amount of work we have done with this old man in the last 4 years is unimaginable.
Raila had the strength of mind and spirit. Raila had the love of this country to know that a handshake was important for us to unite our country.
The people of Kenya have wasted 5 years because of the handshake manenos, because of the kitendawili gentleman. Now you dare tell us that we need to resign. Who needs to go away between us and you?
It remains to be seen, however, whether or not these differences will play out in the ballot come August this year. Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Kenya.
Right now, as Queen Elizabeth II prepares to celebrate 7 decades on the throne, tourist attraction The London Eye has opened a 1950s pub in honor of the occasion. Complete with coronation memorabilia and bartender servicing, what they say is the Queen's favourite tipple, rather. The capsule has views over the capital, including Buckingham Palace itself. The 96-year-old Britain's longest reigning monarch marked 7 decades as Queen in February and 4 days of Platinum Jubilee events to recognise that landmark are being held at the start of June this week. We're going to leave it there for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Of course, we're back next week for a look at the week in review. But for myself, Diesel Wilson and the team, until next time, do stay safe. It is goodbye for now.